Hi, I am Diego, and I am a software engineer who likes testing a lot. I live in Berlin. This is the city you can see in the background. And if you want to contact me, you have there my Twitter handle and my GitHub user in case you want to contribute to any of the open source projects I help to maintain. The clock is not running, so just to say. Cool. I work in a company called Zalando. It's a huge e-commerce. It's the European platform for fashion. And we have millions of customers, thousands of articles, and we are more than 1,900 people in tech. This gives me the opportunity to get in touch with different types of applications and teams. And I work in a team that specializes in providing testing infrastructure to give tools to people that can be used so they start testing much faster. And in this scenario, I was able to talk to teams and also to co-develop an open source project called Selenium. So now I am in between jobs. I'm leaving Zalando. I'm joining 1134, which is a company that works with everything related to Selenium. We have an on-premise solution that is called a Selenium Grid, and we like to do trainings and consulting. And to complement this, I also work in open source. I spend a lot of my time in this scenario. I help happily to maintain the Docker Selenium images, and I try to help as much as possible in the Grid workshop when there is a Selenium conference. And I am very often in the IRC Slack channel for Selenium, so I invite you to join it in case you have questions and if you want to get started with Selenium. It's a very friendly community, and we are answering all types of questions over there. So why did I choose to talk about this topic? Because I feel that there is a lot of information out there. There is an overload of tools that are a bit blinding us and losing the focus of what's really important. Because I think we are spending more time thinking about the tools instead of thinking of what we need to test. And so I invite you to take one step back, to relax a bit, have a coffee or a tea, and then answer two basic questions. First one is, what do we want to test? And second one, what do we want to achieve? If we're able to answer these two questions, the following questions will be way easier to be answered. I strongly think that a great tool will never replace a good testing strategy. And that's why I think automation will always need people, because we need people to make the decision about the strategy and about what we want to test, and then to choose the tools. This doesn't mean that I don't think that using Sauce Labs or the AWS Device Farm and et cetera, it's not cool. I think it's really cool, and it helps us to be better. But the point is that we need to define if we really need the tools or when we need the tools. When I started in testing, I was a bit overloaded with all the types of testing that you have out there. So has anyone seen the Agile testing quadrants? OK, so at least this is something useful that you will take home today. Everybody talks about the testing pyramid, but nobody, or just a few people, talk about the Agile testing quadrants. I saw them in one of the books from Lisa Crispin, and the idea behind them, I will not go into detail because it's very extensive to go into the detail, but the idea is that it tries to put in a map all the types of testings we have. So the point of it is that we have a bunch of different types of testing, and depending on the stage where we are with our team, then this is the type of testing we can use. So to round it up, if you see the tests that are on the bottom part are more focused in tools and in technology. And the idea is that we can actually rely on automation for this type of testing. And the upper part, they are more business-facing type of tests because they are used to double-check that our assumptions and the way we want the web application to work is actually going well. And now let's take left and right. The left side of the quadrants are made to be to support the team. This means that when the team is developing new features, you can run this type of tests to actually double check that everything is still working as it should be. So it's supporting the development process. And on the right side, this is basically a reality check for the product. It's trying to confront our assumptions with real-life situations and getting feedback from these results to improve our left side. Sorry. So I invite you to check these quadrants more in detail. So to start about the 3 different types of testing that we're going to cover in this talk, we're going to define them very briefly. And functional testing, as we know, the main idea of it is that we want to double check that our application is working in the way we expect, period. Layout testing, over there we focus more that if we have a web application that is responsive, it actually is displayed correctly depending on the viewport and the device that we're using. That's the main idea. And the third one, visual testing. Here we focus more on the look, the way the application looks like. So we want to check the colors. We want to check also the layout. We don't want to have elements that overlap each other. And the way it works usually is that you establish a baseline, and the subsequent test results are compared with this baseline. That's the main idea. So the main question here is, how do we use them, or how do we mix them, or maybe not? We need to consider 2 main things. The first one is are the application characteristics. And the second one, in what stage of the development process we are. The application characteristics, by this I mean if this is an e-commerce application, if this is mostly an static application or a dynamic application with a CMS on the back, or a purely graphical application that plots graphics or so on. How many devices we want to support, what viewports, if this is an application that works in different languages and different browsers. And with this, I am proposing this decision table with a clear disclaimer. So please, common sense and context. So the main idea is this one. And I'm going to highlight 3 points here. So the first one is the word maybe. And this means that to make a decision yes or no, we need more information. So for example, if you have a dynamic application that is backed by a CMS or something like that, please check first your user base. Check how many users do you have, how many browsers are these users using to get to your website, what resolutions they're using. And with this, you can actually start thinking about how risky it is if you screw up. That's the main idea. So based on this, you can start deciding, OK, perhaps I should add this extra layer of layout testing or not. And what nice to have means is that if you have the resources and the time, and if this evaluation of risk makes sense, you should also have it. So in general, it's a ponderation of the exposure to risk you have. And when I talk about these internal tools, that it in general is not needed is because if you're working in a company that has an internal tool, and maybe you have just 100 of users or a couple of hundred of users, in general, it's not that bad if you screw the layout, because you will get really fast feedback and you can actually deploy faster. It's not really impacting an external user. But again, if you are working in a huge company with 5,000 users, then it makes sense to have this type of testing. So in general, it's check the numbers you have, the metrics you have to make decisions before actually taking them. Now let's talk about the stage in the development process. What I mean here is the following. Let's take, as an example, these 3 types of application. Let's imagine that we want to start a new feature, and we open a feature branch, right? We start doing some commits. And the idea here is that we should try to run our functional tests in every single commit to provide fast feedback. That's the main purpose of testing during the development process. And I am suggesting to run them in a fast mode. So let me show you what this means. So I took a video of the tests using two types of the page load strategy. This is a capability that is already available in Selenium. It's not recent. It has always been there. And the idea is that when you use a normal page load strategy, it will wait until the page loads completely. And if you put known, then it will try to interact with the website right away. So on the upper part of the screen, you will see a couple of tests on the left side, on the German side, on the right side, on the Spanish side. And they are using the normal page load strategy. And then lower part, it's using the other one. So it's just a normal test where I search for an article. I click on the first one. I go to the detail of the article, select a size, and then I put it in the basket. So the test can get really so much faster when I use this type of strategy, because I'm just like looking for the elements I need to check when I'm doing a functional test. I'm not checking for anything else. Let's take another website as an example. This is a test that goes to GitHub, searches for a repository, looks for it, and then when it finds it, does an assertion on the title. But on the left side, we have Chrome. On the right side, we have Firefox. So this is a website with less amount of images and less amount of resources on the back, and you can see the huge difference. So this is a tip that you can use to actually improve the speed of your tests during the development process. How does this look in the code? Basically, if you see line number 5, I'm switching it with line number 9, and I'm just changing the normal page load strategy to the known page load strategy. But the important thing here is that we have to check that our weights are really well tuned. Otherwise, you will bump often into element not found exceptions and stale element exceptions. OK, so let's imagine that we have done a few commits. And now the feature looks kind of OK, and we want to actually do a pull request to merge it to master and potentially do a release. So if we have this type of application, I will do some layout testing. So let's see how this looks like. I have found perhaps the Galen framework that it's the most common framework to do this type of testing. And the way it works is that you have to specify some specs. And these specs look like this. You specify the elements you want to check in the page, and afterwards, you establish relationships between them. You establish positional and relative relationships between them to say, for example, that the header has to be the width of the screen, that the logo has to be inside the header, and if you're testing on desktop, you have to say that something like the logo is centered, and so on. And my test would look like this. This was quite OK, because my test originally was written in Java. So I just had to add the Galen framework bindings over there. And for example, in line number 4, so line number 2 and 3, I'm actually going to the home page. And in line number 4, I'm invoking the specs I specified to double check the layout. So this is in general the flow. With my functional test, I go to the point where I want to go, and then I execute the layout tests. And in the end, line 16 and 17, I am asserting that, of course, there were no errors in the Galen test. So this is actually pretty nice, because then the Galen framework will run the test. It will resize the browser in the way I need. And the good thing is that it's actually a pretty well-maintained framework. And of course, it's open source. This is something quite nice, and I like open source a lot. And it's very configurable, so you can start tuning different types of assertions. And under the hood, it's using Selenium. The downsides of it is that you have to work the specs in their own domain language. And this means that I can partially reuse my tests, because I can use my functional test to drive the browser over there, but then I have to write the specs. And these bindings are only present in Java and JavaScript. So if I have tests in Python, then I have to make it work out. So I was validating these 3 pages. The first one is a homepage, article, and then the checkout page. And the thing is that I only specified a few elements. But what about the other ones? There are still many things left to check. So if I want to check more things, I have to write more specs. And this means that the level of detail in my test will be like huge. It's too much. And in addition to this, when you have a big DOM, it kind of gets slow. So the point here is that I think that layout test is not very adequate for e-commerce applications that have too many elements that are important. So if you have an application that has only a few elements that are really important that they need to be actually in the correct position, then it's a good fit. But for this type of applications, it's not really a good fit. Let's jump into the other 2 types of applications. So we want to do a merge to master, and we're going to run our visual tests. So I think we have 3 options. The first one is that you roll your own solution for visual testing. The first thing I found is that the well-maintained libraries in the open source world to do image comparison, they're all in JavaScript. So then I had to rewrite my test. And, well, OK, I can do that, and I rewrite it. And now my test that was in Java, it looks like this in JavaScript. This is the summarized version. And I am using WebDriver.io. So I am relying on a hook that WebDriver.io has that is called the after test. And what I do here is not really rocket science. It's very simple. I take the screenshot, I save it, and then I call in line 14 for a function that I implemented based on the library I found that compares the difference between these 2 images, the baseline and the one produced by the test. And it looks like this. It's quite simple. It's a rough proof of concept implementation. Please take it literally. But the idea is that you just invoke the library. The library gives you back a JSON object that has different attributes that tells you the differences of the file. So for example, I am relying on line number 10, the mismatch percentage. So if there is something bigger than 0, there is a difference. And then I'm trying to see what do I do with that. So this is my baseline. It's the product detail page. And then when I run the test again, I see some differences there. So now I have to start to think about what do I do with these differences? Is this a false positive, or is this OK? Do I establish a new baseline? These are questions that I didn't really think about when I wanted to start doing visual testing. The second baseline I have is the checkout page. And then I have these differences with the second test I run. So the upper part, I mean, clearly that's a false positive. And on the lower part, maybe I need to adjust my test to wait for the recommendations to be shown before actually taking the screenshot. So these are things that I have to start thinking about. And on the right side, I mean, what can I do? There is a difference in the scroll bar, so things are not working out there. So I need to start tuning the assertions I'm doing to actually make this work. So when I'm rolling my own solution, the pros I have is that I can customize all the way. I can handle all the answers and all the requests in the way I want because I have full control of the solution. And if I have my tests, well, you could actually reuse your tests and find a way to call these libraries from outside, because in the end, what these libraries are receiving is a baseline and a new image, and they return a result, an image and a JSON file with some attributes telling you what the differences are. And the execution time is quite OK. Everything is executed locally. So it's just taking some screenshots and comparing them locally. So it's not really hurting the performance of the test. The cons, now that you have to maintain more code, and sometimes people don't really like that, you have to start handling the comparison logic of it, and to handle especially these false positives. You have to start thinking about what do I have to tune to understand that this is a false positive or not. And you have to start creating a flow to handle the baselines. I will go more into detail later. The second option I think we have is to use an open source called Gemini. This is a tool developed by Yandex, and it's a really good tool because, oh, sorry. No, let's see first how it looks like. So here I have my configuration file where I specify the base URL, I specify where the Selenium grid is running, what viewport I have, and what plugins I'm using in it. So it's quite straightforward and it's very simple. Now I have my test. So the first thing I see is that I had to rewrite my test again, but it's okay because it's an open source tool and maybe I can adjust to it according to my needs. And in general, what I do is that I go through the application and doing some captures in different moments. A nice thing that this framework has is that it has a very useful UI that can help me to run the tests, but I can also do all these things through command line. So it's very nice that this tool was made with this purpose, to actually do visual testing. And what is happening right now is that the tests are being run in the background, and as soon as I get my first result, I will start seeing it. So let's wait a couple of seconds. There, then we have the first result, my baseline, the new result, and then the differences. For example, there are some differences there that depend on the order of the articles. So that's a visual difference, and then I need to start thinking about how to handle that. And this is not like really the tool, it's my test. I need to start thinking about how I can handle my test to make the assertion much better. The other differences, they might be a false positive. So the good thing is that this tool has a ton of configuration parameters that can help me to do that. And maybe this one is actually a bug. So I have to start thinking if this makes sense or not. One cool thing is that you can actually accept the test in the tool, and you can say, OK, this is a new baseline, and I accept it. And then I can continue to move on. The pros of this tool is that it was made with this purpose. That's the idea of the tool. And it's very configurable. It has many parameters, and it has useful plugins. And again, the execution time is not really affected because everything is done locally. The cons is that you have to rewrite your tests. And I think nobody likes to do that. But again, you can balance your needs and maybe do a proof of concept with this tool, and then start thinking about how to get started in visual testing. And the third option that I find very useful is Applitools. So let's see how this looks like. So this is my original test, the one written in Java. And the cool thing is that I didn't have to change it at all. I had to add my dependencies to use the Applitools SDK, and I add this ICE object, and then I decide when I want to make the checks. In this case, when I go and select the article, et cetera, and when I'm done selecting the checks I want to do, then I do ice.close. So the test is already running, and the next thing is that we're going to switch to the Applitools website, where I can see that there is a validation going on right now. And I'm just going to wait a couple of seconds until the validation is done. So I see the notification from IntelliJ, the tests are done, and there are some differences. So I go into the detail, and I click into the results. And then I see that I have two differences in the website. The first one is the main carousel of the page. There is a difference because, of course, images are changing. And the cool thing here is that I can ignore regions. So this is positive because somehow these are things that I need to solve when I do my own solution. So this is something that Applitools is already solving. And then I can say, this is like the new baseline, and it's OK. And here, it's not easy to see the differences. But with this, just a click, I can see the differences over there. And I can decide if this is a new baseline or not. In this case, I will say, yes, it's OK. And then the final page looks the same. Then when I executed the test again, I didn't have a problem with the home page because the carousel was ignored. OK, so I think the pros about using Applitools is that, again, this is a tool made with this purpose. The main purpose of the tool is to do visual testing and to compare images in a smart way. It's super configurable. For example, do you remember this problem I had when I was doing my own solution with the scroll bar? You can actually set a flag in Applitools to say, just ignore scroll bars, for example. I can reuse my tests, and this is something that many tools are not telling you before they tell you to get engaged with them. The point is that I already have some tests, and I would like to reuse them. This is very important for me as a test engineer. And actually, I don't want to spend so much time adding a solution to my current workflow. It supports many languages, and it has different validation levels. So you can say, only validate my layout, layout plus content, et cetera, et cetera. The cons here is that you need to choose when you want to run these tests, because what is happening is that you're taking a screenshot, it's being sent to the Applitools servers, a validation is being done there, and then you're getting results back. So this is slowing down your tests. So you have to also evaluate this when you're going to add this solution to your workflow. It's paid. I put it as a con, but honestly, I don't think it's really a con, because it's the same discussion when you talk about Selenium Grid, a third-party solution, or rolling your own. Like, you could have 2, 3, 5 engineers working on your own grid or your own visual testing solution. And if you sum this after a year, then maybe you can see what is cheaper for. And also, you have to take into account the validations limit, because there is usually a limit for the open, for the normal plan. So let's do a recap about this. Functional testing. So don't skip it. Never, please. It's the cornerstone, it's the first step. And this is the main layer that is giving us a sense of security. And the idea is that you should always make it part of your test strategy. Layout testing, it's very useful when the content is kind of stable, and maybe you want to do a redesign of your website so you can rely on it to actually check that the elements are displayed properly. And I think it's a good option when you want to do a smoke test in a website, like in an e-commerce website, and you just want to check that the main elements that are the most important for you are already there. Visual testing, I think what is 100% true is that you can validate more stuff with less code. So this is absolutely true. But this is also very tempting, because you tend to write now more tests or to add it to more tests. And it's true that it makes us feel more secure, because we have more coverage now. We're just not checking that the functional part is actually working, but actually we're checking that the way it looks is the way we want. So the idea is that please try to combine it with your functional tests, because you need to check your flows and reach the point that you want to reach, and then do a visual check. But keep in mind that this is just one more item in your strategy. It's not your strategy, it's just one more item. Some things that I have here, I have seen over the past months is that one of the issues is that there is an information overload. Every week there is a new blog post. Every week there is a new tweet with a new tool, so you don't really need what to think. You don't know what to think about this type of testing. And what I think that's most importantly is that you need to invest time to incorporate this type of testing into your workflow, because it is not just a plug-and-play thing. When you actually start using your functional tests with visual testing, you will have tons of reports back. Then you need to start thinking, how do I reduce the review time? And the main thing here is that if you start running your tests with different viewports, with different devices, you will have more and more reports. And this is something that no one wants to review. You just want to actually check things when they make sense. So one thing that I have never seen written anywhere is that you should sit with your team and define a criteria on how to define a baseline. Otherwise, when you run a test and you have a failure, you're going to end up like with this bird of the Simpsons, like saying yes to everything, And this is not the point, because if you start doing this, you're going to blame the tool in the end if a bug goes to production. And the point is that if you define how you can include this tool in your framework and how you can actually define these little rules, then everything will be much easier. And to complete this, please give time to this. There is a learning curve, because you need to start learning how to adjust the parameters of each single tool. And it's helpful to start with one browser and maybe one viewport. When you have this control, then start iterating and go on. So I want to give some credits to Leo Gallucci. With him, we had the initial discussions of this topic, and also to Javier. He works in Barcelona for Typeform, and he actually gave me a lot of good feedback. He is an active user of Applitools. To Lisa Crispin for the Agile Testing Quadrants. To Katrina and Joe Colantonio, because from all the links you find on the internet, I think these are the 3 more valuable ones. You have so much information of people saying how things work, but they never say how things are working in their environment. And with that, I would like to thank you, and I will be open for questions.
So I think we have time for a couple of questions.
There is one, okay.
So you evaluated 3 different possible solutions for using visual testing. What was the criteria, or how would you define a criteria that would give you a metric to say, I should use one over the other? So if as in like would cost or investment, or how would you measure that?
From my personal point of view, the criteria I would use to select a tool is to see the least amount of work I need to do on my site. Because unless you are in a situation that you have unlimited time and unlimited resources to research, you actually want to take something new and add it to your team to start producing value. So from my point of view, if your tests are written in JavaScript, then maybe you can start using one of the open source libraries I recommended, because they are actively maintained and they are very high rated in GitHub stars. But if you have your tests in Python or in Ruby and you have a framework over there, then I will try to choose a solution that is actually reducing my work time into incorporating it. So these are variables that are very important and are constantly overlooked.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
I think we're out of time.
We have 2 minutes, no?
Well, we started a little bit late.
Okay. Then.
So thank you, Diego. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.